Hi everyone, this is Richard. I'm going to be your instructor for the 4 Skills course, and today we're going to give kind of an overview of the 4 skills and some of the concepts that we'll be coming back to over the course of this course. So here we go. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Richard West. I started teaching ESL in 2009, and since then I've been teaching it along with a fair amount of linguistics, applied linguistics, and English composition. I've taught in Thailand and Ohio, as well as Seattle now. I just moved, though, to Seattle in 2017, so very recently. My professional interests are focused on technology in the classroom and needs analysis, genre work, that kind of thing. And my other hobbies include sports, music, theater, games, learning, other stuff, lots of stuff. I'm interested in lots of things, so yeah, hope to talk to you about them at some point. So here's an overview of what we're going to be doing today for this lecture. We're going to review some of the methods and talk about how they interact with some of the skills. We'll talk about some kind of broad divisions between the skills, different ways to think about the different skills that we are covering. And we'll talk about some recurring concepts that will come up for each of the skills as we talk about them in this course. So we'll start out with them. So our 4 skills are going to be reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Grammar, vocabulary, and culture are also really important, but they're outside of the scope of this course for the most part. Pronunciation is one that is also kind of in a gray area, but we are going to talk about pronunciation under speaking. All right, so let's think about some of the methodologies we've thought about, or you've learned about in 510 and elsewhere. Think about how they interact with the 4 skills. So we think about grammar translation. There's virtually no speaking and listening in that. In the direct method, there was less reading and writing, and also a focus on kind of discrete language chunks and very little on discourse. The audiolingual method had virtually no reading and writing, at least in the instruction. The big 4 methods of the 1970s, your silent method, Suggestopedia, etc., had a mix of ideas, but none of them really got a picture of the whole experience, the whole language experience and balancing the 4 skills. So that brought us to communicative language teaching, which had a focus on meaning, a focus on form, and targets all 4 of those skills to varying degrees. So when we talk about task-based learning, we have a mix of the skills as well, especially when we're working on authentic language tasks and tailoring the instruction and skill work to move toward those tasks. There's also a movement toward English for specific purposes, which is the idea that you're teaching not just English, but specific features in the variety of English that the learner wants access to. And that might be, that could be academic English or business English or everyday conversational English. There are a lot of different options. That requires, though, needs analysis and discourse analysis within the real performance of that language. And as far as skills go, it will cover different skills to different degrees depending on the needs of that specific purpose. So we'll talk about some general kind of divisions between the skills and how we're going to think about them differently here. So we have receptive skills, which are listening and reading, versus productive skills, which are more writing and speaking. Receptive skills are harder to observe. They happen inside your brain. They're hard to record how well you're listening, but so it often requires some productive skills to measure and observe a learner's receptive skill progress. Productive skills are easier to observe, and for that reason they tend to get more classroom and research attention. Oral skills versus visual skills. Oral skills are listening and speaking, and they are acquired naturally during L1 acquisition. They also, though, require real-time processing, so it can be harder to teach learners and slow things down enough so that learners can effectively process listening and speaking. It takes a little more work to develop the right materials and strategies for that. Visual skills do give you more time to process. The visual skills also often have a higher cultural value. We think of written language as being more correct or more important in a lot of cases. It has a higher value in academic English for sure. So it often gets more classroom and research attention for that reason as well. Fluency versus accuracy is an idea that we're going to have to come back to several times. Fluency is essentially processing language at a native-like speed, and accuracy is processing grammatically accurate language. So fluency is necessary to function, but it's often underemphasized outside of speaking. We know about speaking fluently, but fluent listening, fluent reading, fluent writing are also things to work on. Accuracy often has a higher cultural value, and learners might have a stronger preference for thinking about accuracy, but fluency is just as valuable for language production and language performance. We'll focus in a little bit more on receptive versus productive skills here. So remember that our receptive skills, like listening and reading, they are invisible processes. They also have a top-down, bottom-up division between skills. So when we think about, if we look at the picture on the right, we shouldn't have any trouble reading the cat, even though the character in the middle of both words is identical, because our bottom-up processing notices that, but our top-down processing realizes that that these are probably going to be words that mean something. The cat is an easy enough phrase to understand. So our top-down processing fills it in. For the receptive skills, we also need to think about doing extensive versus intensive work. So extensive would be working with very long texts to get general ideas, versus intensive, which would be looking at very short texts to gain specific information or to do other kind of more detailed tasks. And when I say texts, that could be a listening text or a reading text. In both cases, it's very important to have authentic materials. We want to have materials that are real English, made for real English using individuals. We want to avoid things that are made for students when we can. And also think more specifically about the needs of your population. What kinds of reading or listening materials will your population be encountering in their lives? For this, we want to build autonomy, and especially think about technological tools you can help them to learn autonomously. How can they go out and find materials that will work for them? And part of that is giving them strategies to find and use different tools and ways that they can manage the input that they get. Make sure that the input they get is comprehensible, has a clear, it has an appropriate rate, appropriate structure, and appropriate content. On the other hand, we have productive skills. These are our speaking and writing skills, and basically we have a fluency versus accuracy consideration, like I said before. You want to work on both, but you want to make your expectations clear when you're giving feedback and when you're doing other kinds of, when you're incorporating it into the classroom. Again, we want to focus on authentic tasks here. I'm going to come back to authenticity again and again. We want these tasks to be in line with the needs of your population. What kinds of tasks are they going to need in their real lives? You also want to be structuring your discourse explicitly. This means there should be a clear structure to the kinds of speaking and the kinds of writing that your learners are doing, so that they're creating language that's realistic and authentic to real language use. We want to think about learning beyond the classroom with these folks, or with these skills and these folks. How can they continue developing without teacher feedback? Eventually they're leaving the classroom. How are they going to continue developing after that? And then a topic we'll come back to is compensatory metacognitive strategies. Teaching to paraphrase, to plan, to prepare for new tasks, and monitor their own thinking and progress so that they can have more ownership over their learning process. So for each of our skills, we're going to talk about a few different points. First, we'll be talking about skills and tasks. H. Douglas Brown has a nice list of micro skills and macro skills for each skill that I will be incorporating into the lectures. The micro skills are kind of nitty-gritty, detailed, focused, bottom-up type skills, where macro skills are going to be big picture, discourse level type, top-down skills. It's nice to kind of have these laid out and made specific so that when you're thinking about developing different skills, you can get different ideas for different angles to take. And when we talk about tasks, we're going to focus on authentic tasks, and we'll talk about combining skills and using language in realistic situations and patterns. Next, we'll talk about some learner strategies we'll be working with over the course of each skill. There are lots of different learner strategies that we want to think about imparting to our learners. So we want to give our learner strategies so that they can improve their own language skills and not be solely reliant on the classroom activities to learn. So some of them are cognitive strategies to analyze language. There are also metacognitive strategies to monitor one's own progress and one's own cognition in the learning process. There are memory strategies like mnemonic devices to remember new information, compensatory strategies to compensate for deficits, effective strategies to monitor your mood and your stress level and make sure that you're in the right mindset to effectively learn and perform. And then social strategies to use other people to solve problems and otherwise find resources to help. We want these so that learners can build their own, or they can become more autonomous. They can deal with new language that they encounter inside or outside of the classroom in the future. We'll also talk about, for each skill, needs analysis. So the idea of needs analysis is basically want to think about what the goals of a course and student population are. You think about the students, what kinds of needs do they have, what kind of lacks do they want, what kind of genres or types of texts and language performance are they going to be dealing with? These can lead to really specific or really general programs. So if we think about, you could have very narrow courses in aviation English or business English, or you might have totally general ones like a community ESL course or English as a foreign language courses that kind of cover everything and have a fairly shallow but wide area of English and type of English that they're teaching. A little bit about genres. So genres are texts that have a specific expected purpose and an expected rhetorical structure. So think about movies. You know, you've heard the word genre with movies, TV, music, books. But we have lots of other genres of everyday language use. So there are professional genres of writing, there are business genres, personal genres like writing emails or having conversations, everyday life type interactions. A bill has an expected purpose and rhetorical structure. And an encounter with customer service has a certain structure to it that we can actually analyze and impart to our students. And in this case, for these, we do want to try to use authentic models of genres as materials. So find a real bill, find a real recording of a customer service interaction, find a real business memo, find a real student essay, so that you can help your learners be comfortable with the reality of that genre. Yeah, so in general here, our idea of needs analysis, we want to figure out the goals of the course, the purpose of the institution, as well as a lot about the population. What do they need? What do they want? What do they lack? What skills are they lacking in? What skills will be involved? What topics and themes are appropriate, and what genres will be appropriate for models. Next, talk for each one about uses of technology. So for technology, there are definitely a lot of benefits to technology, but there are also some disadvantages, and in the classroom we definitely want to be using technology in the most strategic possible way. So our benefits, using technology really reflects the everyday life for most of our learners. Using smartphones, using computers is part of everyday life, and having that in the classroom just kind of helps to reflect that. Also gives a lot of opportunities for autonomous learning, and it bridges distance gaps, like in this very course. There are disadvantages, though. Technology can be distracting. It can offer shortcuts, especially if you think about Google Translate. Is not as good as you might think it would be. It's also often stigmatized in academic settings. Some teachers do not like to have any technology in the classroom because it's, I don't know, those people have their reasons. I don't totally understand them. So you want to think about your best practices. You want to have a clear and focused purpose for technology use in classrooms. You also want to make sure that you're training learners in how to use technological tools, and you want to use tools that are familiar to learners. Yeah, I'll give you a second. I want you to think about some of these, but I want you to think about some of the different ways you could use some of these technological tools in the classroom. Some of them might be a little more surprising, but I've definitely seen all of them used at different points in time. I won't talk about all of them, but I do like to talk about Wikipedia. I think Wikipedia is a great tool for language learning because it's actually very uniformly written, so you can find, you can analyze discourse in it very easily. You can find certain patterns in the way that people talk about different topics. You can also have learners go on and write on Wikipedia, especially about something they would have some particular knowledge about, maybe their hometown or something having to do with their home culture, which might be underrepresented in English language Wikipedia. So I think it's a great tool. I think the other tools are great as well. As we think about building learner autonomy, we talked about it with strategies, but we also want to more generally think about teaching our learners to monitor and guide their own learning, teaching them how to find new materials, learning from new materials. Another challenge is getting feedback on their production, sometimes their reception as well. How do they get feedback in the world outside of the classroom? And how can they generally continue toward their goals when they're out in the classroom? That can be very challenging. The last major point we'll talk about for each skill is assessment. You want to remember that not all teaching should look like assessment. You don't want to be in the habit of always having all of your classroom tasks be worksheets that kind of look like quizzes. We talk about assessment. We want to see how good our assessments are. So here are the concepts that are important when we're assessing assessment. That's Is it practical? Is it reliable? Is it valid? Is it authentic? And does it have a washback effect? Washback effect is basically after a student performs an assessment, will it give that student or that learner feedback about their performance? For classroom assessments, we really want this. We want learners to be able to take the results of an assessment and have a clear idea of how to apply that to their future work. Remember that there are different purposes of assessment too. We have our big kind of proficiency tests or placement tests, or diagnostic tests to look at the levels of learners. There are also achievement tests, just to see if a learner has mastered content, a certain set of content. There are aptitude tests, but also there are progress assessments where the purpose of the assessment is just to show the teacher and the learner what kind of progress that learner is making at the moment. So it's useful to have these kind of smaller progress assessments, sometimes in every class session, just to make sure that everybody can see that the learners are on track. So we think about the learning experience, or the learning experience and teaching experience here. We want to think about a lot of these different points, and actually your first discussion board post is going to be related to this. So the idea is that with each student population we encounter, we want to think about the skills that are going to be involved. We want to think about what that population needs, wants, and lacks, what the purpose of the course is. We want to think about what topics and themes might be appropriate, what genres will be appropriate to find as models for them, what kind of technologies will be useful, what kind of strategies they might need to become more autonomous in the future, and then what assessments would be appropriate for this population. And your post is going to be about one of these example populations. You can pick your own, but I want you to think about what this population is going to need and how you can apply these ideas and how you can answer these questions to best meet their needs. So that's it for this lecture. Check out the discussion board for more information about that question, but I hope it was interesting, and please let me know if you have questions. All right. Goodbye.